Look closely at a map of the world and you see a reassuring grid of hard borders, sovereign states, and distinct national flags. We are taught from childhood that inside these lines, a government is supreme. It prints its own money, commands its own territory, and guards its own national wealth. But if you peer past the symbols of statehood and look at the quiet ledgers where the true wealth of these nations resides, those borders begin to blur. You start to notice a strange, almost invisible ritual that every country on earth performs daily. They take the physical fruits of their citizens' labor, their copper, their grain, their technology, and they sell them to the global market. But they do not keep the proceeds of that toil in their own vaults. Instead, they take that hard-won value and exchange it for digital entries in foreign bank accounts, mostly in Washington, Frankfurt, or London. They buy debt. They buy promises. They buy money they can never fully own and can never truly control. This is the quiet engine of the global financial system, known politely as foreign exchange reserves. It is a system built on a strange, unquestioned assumption. To be considered financially stable, a sovereign nation must prove it has vast stores of another country's currency. A developing country must sweat under the sun to extract raw materials and assemble goods, only to trade them for pieces of paper, or more accurately, blips of light on a screen hosted by a foreign central bank. We call this building security. We call it protecting the national interest. But if you pause to think about it, the logic begins to warp. It is like working 70 hours a week for a landlord, and then taking your wages and handing them right back to him, not to pay your rent, but to keep in his personal safe because you do not trust your own pockets. The paradox runs deeper than simple trust. It is a question of actual custody. When a nation decides to tap into its reserves during a crisis, they do not open a physical vault filled with gold or cash. They must ask the issuer of that currency for permission to move it. They must hope the payment networks remain open, the clearing systems remain cooperative, and the political winds do not shift overnight. The global financial system operates on the assumption of absolute trust, but trust in this arena is a highly conditional commodity. It is an agreement that exists only as long as it is convenient for the issuer. The moment a nation acts too independently, or crosses an invisible geopolitical line, those digital reserves can vanish with a single keystroke. We have seen this happen. It is not a conspiracy theory, but rather the standard operating procedure of modern economic leverage. A superpower does not need to invade a country to paralyze its society. It simply needs to freeze its access to its own savings. This reveals a deeper, more unsettling truth that we rarely acknowledge. The very thing we call sovereign wealth is, in reality, a mechanism of voluntary subordination. By participating in this system, nations are not securing their independence. They are purchasing their own leash. The global reserve currency is not just a neutral tool for trade. It is an operating system. And when you run your economy on someone else's operating system, you do not actually own your hardware. You are merely a user, subject to an end-user license agreement that can be updated, modified, or terminated at any time without your consent. The paradox is absolute. To protect your sovereignty, you must surrender your economic autonomy to the very powers that might one day threaten you. You must buy their debt to prove your own worth, effectively financing the very hegemony that keeps you compliant. Some might argue that there are alternatives, that nations can simply opt out. They can buy gold, or they can try to trade exclusively in their own local currencies. But gold is heavy, difficult to transport, and hard to spend in a sudden crisis. And trading in minor, unpegged currencies is like trying to run a modern multinational corporation using typewriters and carrier pigeons. It is slow, inefficient, and rejected by the wider world. The system has built its own walls so high that escaping them feels like jumping into an abyss. So, the cycle continues, self-reinforcing and inescapable. Every day, cargo ships leave ports in South America, Africa, and Asia, loaded with the physical, tangible wealth of the earth. And every day, the digital ledgers in a few Western capitals click upward, recording the debt owed back to them. It is a transaction where one side gets the physical reality, and the other gets the abstract promise. And we have convinced ourselves that the abstract promise is the real prize. In the quiet of our daily lives, this macroeconomic theater seems incredibly distant. We buy our groceries, we pay our taxes, and we trust that the money in our pockets has some solid, unchanging value. We assume that our governments are the ultimate guardians of our collective future, acting as shields against the chaos of the outside world. We like to believe that the world is run by people who have a firm, stable grip on the steering wheel. But when you look at the architecture of global reserves, you realize that the steering wheel is not connected to the axle in the way we think. The institutions we rely on to protect us are themselves suspended in a web of dependency, holding on to assets that are essentially just permissions granted by foreign entities. They are holding on to money that can be turned off like a light switch. If the wealth of your nation is ultimately just a line of code on a server half a world away, held at the pleasure of a foreign government, then who really owns your country's future, and what happens to you when they decide to turn the server off?